Hi, good evening, CFP. Welcome to the fourth lecture of Perspectives and Introduction to the Arts and Social Sciences. This is the last one for this semester, so we're going to close with a bang. Today we have Lavanya Lakshminarayan with us. She's an award-winning author and game designer. She's a Locus Award finalist. For those who read SF and fantasy, you know what a big deal this is. This is a list that had names like Susanna Clark and Stephen King on it. So really cool. She's going to tell us about creating new worlds today. As always, please put any questions you have in the Zoom chat box and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. Lavanya, welcome to CFP and thank you so much for doing this. Handing this over to you now.
Hi, everyone. Can all of you hear me? Am I audible? That's great. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I'm really excited to be here speaking with all of you about my experience in a creative career. I'm really grateful to Dhruvika and Diana and everyone else for setting up this conversation today. Give me a quick second. I'm sharing my screen and we can get started. All right. So as I was saying, I've been a creative practitioner in multiple spaces for over a decade now. And my creative journey has been incredibly interesting. It's been unique to me, just like each person's creative journey is unique to themselves. And there are really no right or wrong answers to tap into your creativity, to explore it and to express it. So I'm hoping that the insights and experiences that I share will be useful to all of you, whether you are yet to start on your journey, are already somewhere along the way, or are even contemplating it, right? A quick introduction to me, I'm Lavanya. I'm an award-winning author and I'm a game designer. I am obsessed with stories. I love storytelling and I see myself as a storyteller, no matter what space I'm working in. Now, through this talk, as I said before, I'm going to take you on my creative journey and share the experiences that I have had and kind of build a timeline so that you can see how these things play out from somebody who's actually looking backwards. When I started on this, I had no idea it could turn out this way. And it is always interesting to look back because, and I personally enjoy sharing this, because I hope it helps people feel confident and comfortable wherever they are at. After that, I'm going to take what I've learned and sort of break it down into what I see are the pillars of my creative process. And then I'm going to go into how you can implement that kind of a process as an everyday framework. So what are the practices that you can incorporate into everyday life that will help you become a great storyteller no matter what you're doing? Starting with creative journeys. Now, it's never too early or too late to decide that you want to be a creator. Human beings are fundamentally storytellers. What draws us together is a love for storytelling. If we believe in something, it's because we believe in the story behind it. And this doesn't matter if you're talking about, books or movies or games, even if you are a musician, a sound producer, a city planner, an architect. Through all of this, what you are doing is you are telling stories and you are finding a way to reach out to other human beings to express your vision of the world or your vision of the future with them. Now, my creative journey started off with very large ambitions. When I was 8 years old, I wrote my first composition in school. And I'm sure this is an experience common to most of us. No matter what language you study in, the first composition you write is myself. And so I wrote about myself, I wrote about my family, and I ended it with this very ambitious statement. When I grow up, I want to be an author. And this is way back in 1997. I was enamored with stories. I was a pest of a child. I would drive all the adults around me nuts asking them to tell me stories until I learned how to read. And at that point, I wound up becoming a reading monster. Luckily, we had a library nearby, or my parents might have gone bankrupt. I watched movies, I played video games, I listened to a ton of music. If it was out there for me to consume, I would consume it. But I really wanted to write, and I wanted to be an author. And this tiny little dream that I started off with as a child, I went through school writing in notebooks. I was the kid sitting in the back of a class with a little diary, writing fiction in it all the time. And eventually I graduated high school and I went on to do a degree in English literature because I love reading. And then I had this degree and I thought, now what? And this was the year 2010. I still wanted to be an author. I had this degree, but I also wanted a job. I wanted stability. I wanted to experience the creative profession. And in 2010, this is before being a creator on YouTube was a major career. It was before you could be an influencer on Instagram or do really any of those really fun things. In 2010, if you had an arts degree, a lot of your profession, a lot of the people around you told you that you could go into journalism, you could go into academia, you could work in PR or advertising or event management. Of course, you could also be a novelist or a filmmaker or any of those other big dreams. But those are and remain high-risk careers. And at this point, I really just wanted some stability. And so I had this brief stint in a public relations firm. Now, this was absolutely not for me. I wanted to tell stories and put my work out there. And PR didn't allow me to do that. But I did manage social media campaigns for some of our clients while I was working at this company. And, my manager, I quit pretty early. My manager from the company went off and joined this big game studio that had just started a Bangalore office. And the studio happened to be Zynga. For those of you who aren't familiar with games, Zynga was and remains one of the biggest makers of casual games in the gaming industry. They make games across, they used to make games on web. Now they make games across mobile. And so my manager joined and she referred me and she said, Lavanya might be able to handle your social media for your games. And I interviewed there and I was hired. Now, during the course of my interview, these lovely interviewers found out that I write. And they asked me what kinds of stuff I write, what I read, and what I consume. And I told them. So 1 week after I joined, one of these managers came up to me and said, we need a quest to be written. I don't have the time. Can you write a quest for us? And I said, yes, sure. And I wrote my first quest. I was terrified. It went into the game, went out into the world, did really well. And before I knew it, I was writing quests for games. So, at the age of 21, here I am, I'm writing for games. I'm also a social media manager. I'm a project manager. I'm learning a lot. These were some of the most intense years of my life because I spent them in a very high pressure environment, learning what it was like to work and be creative in the real world, where you can't sit around with a cup of tea waiting for inspiration to strike you. You've got to produce on demand towards deadlines. You've got to be able to work with other team members. You have to be able to take their feedback, incorporate their ideas. And this kind of exploded my perspective on what it meant to be building worlds. Now, just to clarify, the work that I've done in games isn't on the technical side. I don't write code. I'm not a programmer, but I am a creative person. So I've done a lot of art direction, animation direction, a lot of writing and world building. And when I joined Zynga and when I started working on games, I had a lovely team of people who are very willing to give this new kid a chance and to support me. And I'm very grateful to them for it. Another thing I have to call out at this point is when I joined, I was one of only 8 women in the company. And I feel I have to draw attention to this because a lot of the time, when you are a woman or otherwise marginalized, you will be in the minority in any creative space that you occupy. And I got very lucky that I had supportive men and women around me who gave me opportunities. And I hope when you do embark upon your journeys, it is the same for you as well. So I was writing for games, but gaming is a demanding and very challenging, non-stop kind of profession. So I burnt out pretty quick. Within 3 years, I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't wake up. I didn't have the motivation to get up and go into work. And so I quit my job and I said, now I'm going to write a novel. I'm ready. I've done some time in the creative industry. I've expressed myself. I'm no longer afraid of showing my work. And so this is the time and I'm going to write. And I did write, but something was still lacking. I still couldn't go all the way and actually finish a project as large as a novel. And it started to get really frustrating. I realized that there were a lot of gaps in my understanding of how to harness my creative energy and how to channel it. And I just needed way more experience before I could do it for myself. And so I went back to games. And I worked as a game designer. And I got to work on much larger projects. So instead of working on features and stories that took me a week to write, I was suddenly working on things that took me a year to create. It took me a year of working with, people from a whole bunch of teams, from product to art to animation. And it really, let me experience what it is like to get something massive off the ground. I learned that there is a lot of time involved, and a lot of it is about taking it slow and making decisions and revisiting those decisions and ensuring that they stand the test of time. And this was incredible knowledge for me to be able to experience firsthand. I did this for a few years. And after a certain point, I started to feel more and more confident in my ability to work on really large projects. I started to feel like this was something I could do to create the kinds of things I really wanted to create from a personal perspective. And so I quit my job again. And I was 28 and I decided I'm going to be a writer. I am a writer and I'm going to finish this novel. I was a full-time writer. On the side, I did some game design consultancy. So I worked on designing a game on blockchain. It never released. This is the reality of a lot of creative industries. You might work on a project, but they might never see the light of day. I also worked on an augmented reality startup with ex-colleagues of mine. We were building an AR game for battle robots, and we even ended up 3D printing robots that were custom made so that we could really design a game from scratch. And while I was doing all of this, I started a novel. And compared to all the other attempts I had made in the past, it was so much easier this time around. I'm not saying it was easy because it is never easy, but relatively, I felt a lot more equipped with the tools to see a really large and long-term project through. And I believe I gained these tools just by working in a creative industry where I was answerable and responsible for day-to-day deliverables, working in an office. So all of that kind of translated into my ability to write a book. And so I did. It took me about a year to write the book. I found an agent, I found a publisher in India, And, around 2 years later, when I was 30, I had a published book out there. Now, this was massive. This was the coming together of the dream I'd set out on when I was 8 years old. But my book released in February 2020, 2 weeks before we went into lockdown and the pandemic took the world by storm. And all my dreams, from the age of 8, where I thought I'm going to have this massive book launch, I will, I'll curate the experience end to end. And because it's a book based on futurism and the future of Bangalore, I'm going to have this really, high-tech thing that looks like an Apple project launch. So I had all these big dreams, and I couldn't execute any of them because we went into lockdown. And the world was really in a terrible place. And it was a really hard time for everybody to cope with what was going on. And at that point, my book kind of just disappeared off the radar. There were some lovely people who wrote in and told me they liked it. There were some lovely fellow authors who wrote in with kind things to say, and I'm very grateful for them. But it wasn't the big bang that I had set myself up for. And of course, I was disappointed. I was also used to working in games where everything is really fast-paced. You put a feature out there, within 24 hours, you've got a whole bunch of data, and you know exactly what's going on with it, and you know how you can improve it and whether it's successful or not. Publishing was very different. I had no idea how this book was doing. I was frustrated because I couldn't even tell where it was selling, who it was selling to, who was it really appealing to. I still can't tell these things. I've just made my peace with them. But at that point, I felt quite let down. At the same time, I was so uncertain, I ended up working as a game designer again, simply because I didn't even know where my writing career was going to go. Cut to 1 year later, a whole year after my book releases, it finally starts gaining a little bit more visibility. There are more people reading it, writing to me, telling me they enjoy it. It gets shortlisted for some awards. It wins some awards. And this came out of the blue. I didn't expect it at all because I'd kind of given up. I thought, maybe I just wrote a dislikable book and it's going to go nowhere. And I will bide my time and go back and write a second book. But then all of these good things started happening. And I started, falling in love with writing again. I started writing short stories again, which brings me to where I am right now. I'm a full-time writer. I'm working on my second novel. I would love to do games, but I just don't have the time because I'm so busy writing. And this is really the dream I set out on. It is absolutely terrifying. It is completely uncertain. Nothing about it is predictable. But I love waking up every single day and confronting that uncertainty, which is strange for me because I also love predictability. But something about the way these experiences have lined up over the years has made me feel a lot more prepared to step into the unknown, to deal with it, and to be able to tell the stories I want to tell, despite the fact that I don't even know if anybody is listening to them. Now, I'm going to take everything I learned on that timeline, practically the learnings from the last 24 years of my life, and I'm going to try and break them down into a few important chunks that I believe lend themselves to my creative process. Just to recap, this is what a career in a creative field looks like. There's no predicting where it's going to go. There's no predicting where you'll start, what steps you'll take along the way. Sometimes it might be completely unrelated to what you actually want to do, but it is my belief that eventually all of it adds up. So starting with my great declaration when I was 8 years old, I want to be an author. When I said that, very unwittingly, I was expressing an intention. Now, intention to me is very important because it gives me something to come back to every time the going gets hard. And the going gets hard very often in the creative field. So each time I set an intention, I think through why this is my intention, what my intention is, and I kind of write it down or keep track of it. So when things go really, really wrong, like when I'm struggling to find a publisher for something, or when I absolutely cannot think of a design solution for a problem that I'm looking at in a game, I go back to the intention. And that gives me a lot of clarity. Now, intentions aren't set in stone. They can change all the time. You can always revisit your intention and say, yes, I believed in this 2 years ago, but it's no longer relevant to me, and I would like to move on. And that is perfectly fine. But if you really still believe in your intention and you want to do what you are doing, it is always helpful and it functions as a reminder of what all your efforts are being directed towards. So yes, after that, I do my literature degree. And I think, now what? Now, it was really hard, as it is always when you're confronting a really big life change, for me to be perfectly calm and not anxious about it. I was incredibly anxious about it. But I kept trying to remind myself that there was no set path to achieving any dream or any goal. And so I decided to step into whatever happened after my degree with a lot of openness to new experiences, to different types of jobs. I went in with the mindset that I could learn from everything and that everything would be a valuable experience to me. And I still try and maintain this because, as I said, there is a ton of uncertainty in any creative industry. And being open about the uncertainty and about the opportunities coming your way really makes a difference. When I was writing for games, this was a period of intense learning. And I believe that there is no limit to learning in any creative field. I'm still learning. When I read books, I'm studying them. When I play games, I'm deconstructing how they work. When I enter into conversations with people, I want to not be the smartest person in the room, because that means there's room for me to grow and that everybody around me is going to enrich my experience and make me a better person or give me more skills. When I quit my job and decided to write, I started building a practice. Now, I wasn't a master of this practice. It was very trial and error. What I was trying to do was cobble together what I thought the life of an author would be. So, wake up, make my coffee, sit in front of my desk and start writing, and do this every single day and study what other writers are doing. What are the kinds of things they're talking about on Twitter and on Instagram? A very broken sort of cobbled together way of doing it, but this was me laying down the foundation for what would eventually become a practice that I found sustainable. When I worked as a game designer, I did so because I needed to grow. And working as a game designer helped me grow. When I was establishing my process, I realized that there were enormous gaps. I couldn't focus for 8 hours at a time, day in and day out, working effectively in the dark, because when you're writing a lot of the time, you're writing alone. And I didn't have the confidence to create my work and then sit back and say, you know what, this is good enough. I had to go and learn that confidence. I needed to grow into myself and into my voice. I had to give myself time. And that's what I ended up doing. The next time I quit and I tried to write a book, I'd grown a lot. I'd imbibed a lot of my experiences, and I did so with a lot of self-belief. Now, when I say self-belief, I'm not saying it's an on-off switch. In fact, a lot of the time, it's a bit of a wave, because you go through these days where you think, yes, I've got this, I'm doing really, really well. And the immediate next day you can crash and you reread what you've written or what you've designed, and you look at it and you say, this is absolute rubbish. I don't even know why I bother. But having seen that process through multiple times in a professional environment, surrounded by supportive people, let me know that, somewhere I think I've got this, I think I can do it. If I just take 2 steps back and revisit it again, it might look a lot better than I think it is today. The other tricky thing when you're working for yourself is staying motivated because you're always going up and down in this wave. And somehow, again, working in the supportive environment, I had people supporting me through this whole process saying, you know what, don't give up, keep going. And that made a huge difference to me. Now, when I was 30 and I published my book, and I had the huge disappointment of not having a book launch and all of that, I realized this book is not going to sell 1 million copies. It isn't going to take the world by storm. But at the same time, lovely people wrote to me and said they enjoyed it. They really connected with it and they related to it. And I would not trade that for anything in the world, because each of these people writing into me was a tiny little victory for me, saying I reached out to one person on this planet. And every single time I reach out to one person, whether it's hearing player feedback on games that I've designed or feedback on stories that I've written, victory. Now, the reason I call it a small victory is because I think we are trained to look at success stories on a really large scale. And we are trained to see success as an either or black and white thing. So either you are, a multi-billionaire writer, a bestseller like Stephen King, or you are nothing. And that is not the reality. Every day when you feel joy doing what you're doing, that is a victory. And every time something nice and unexpected happens, that is a victory. And we shouldn't lose sight of these smaller victories just because they aren't as big as being Stephen King. Now, finally, coming back to where I am today, as I've been saying, every day comes with its challenges and its uncertainty. I live with rejection being a constant reality. When I put my work out there might be editors who hate it and they will not publish it. There might be readers who read 10 pages and quit. There is no point attempting to please everybody. I think the only reason one has the strength to keep growing and going in a field like this is because one is committed to the process. One is committed to their vision of the stories that they're trying to tell. And as long as you keep persisting, you might not have a million people reading your work, but the 10 people who read your work will really relate with it. And that will bring you a great amount of joy. So just summarizing, I've put all of this here, and I know it looks incredibly esoteric and very high level, but I really believe that this is sort of the matrix that drives me every single day. And this is a matrix that I didn't, necessarily consume out of a self-help book or read about or understand theoretically. I went out into the field and I practiced creativity as a career. And every single step in that practice let me take away, one aspect or several aspects of these words over here and of these ideas over here. And as I work today, regardless of what I'm working on, this forms the backbone of my everyday process. Now, how do I translate this into steps when I'm sitting in front of the computer or when I'm working on a project? I'm going to go into that next. And I'm going to talk about how we can take these ideas and build an everyday framework for creation. Now, I spoke a little bit about intention earlier, and an intention is a statement of purpose. It is what you want to do. But every time I set out and state an intention, I make sure I ask myself the hard questions. If I can answer these questions and answer them satisfactorily, then I know that, I've come up with my intention with integrity. And why integrity is important is because that's what's going to allow you to go through all the ups and downs to see your intention through. So what are these hard questions? This is actually a bottomless pit. It's kind of like going down the rabbit hole, but these are some of my favorites. Whenever I'm creating something, I say, why do I want to tell this story? Why am I the best person? Or why is my team the best team to tell the story? And why are people going to care? We live in a world where there is so much entertainment available, and there is so much available out there that you really need to figure out what makes your story so unique that somebody's going to choose it over everything else out there. Sort of the follow-up to the big why, or the many big whys, and you can really go down this rabbit hole, by the way. You can keep going deeper and deeper into every single why. These are like nested questions. But once I've kind of got a feel for why I want to do something, I start asking myself, what is it, right? What's my audience going to see? If they're playing a game, what are they going to experience? What feelings is it going to bring up? Am I going to make them think? Am I going to make them feel joy? Do I want to deliver a sense of wonder? How can I get them there? And a lot of the time, you can't force somebody along a path. You can make all the right suggestions to create a sense of joy, or to create a sense of poignancy, or say sadness. But your audience is also going to have to meet you halfway, and that is not in your control. You can do your best. And that brings me to the how. The how is really where all the experience you gain over the years comes together to give you the best possible tools to create the kind of story your audience might want to encounter. I'm going to go a little bit into the how of it now. So my favorite place to start is by prototyping, creating a working model. When it comes to books, writing a first draft. And most writers will tell you they hate writing a first draft because it's absolutely painful. Every single day when you're creating a first draft, it's about as much fun as pulling your own teeth, simply because you'd never know if it's working. And a lot of the time you've got all of these ideas, you need to put them down, and the words just aren't as pretty as what you want them to be. And I'm here to say none of that matters. Just get everything out there on paper. If you are building a working model of, let's say, a flow. Now, in games, every single experience can be broken down into a flow. Prototype that flow beginning to end. Prototypes don't necessarily have to involve complex code. A lot of the time we decide, let's take a simple feature. I want player to perform action X, collect item Y, and exchange it for Z. And then they will be able to perform X faster. It's very simple to build a prototype for this feature just using paper. We've done it before, paper, flashcards, just get it to work. Try and experience it in its most bare minimum form. Or if you're writing, or let's say making music, record it. Record that first draft of a piece of music. Create that first sketch when you're drawing. Don't aim for perfection. Perfection is part of the process, and it's honestly mostly unachievable, but you can keep improving it, whatever you're creating. You can keep improving it so long as you have something that you're beginning with. Once you've prototyped, it's really important to show your work. Now, I'm terrible at this. I used to be even worse because I'm really scared of whether what I've created is good enough. I've kind of worked on getting over this fear by surrounding myself with, a small handful of people who are critical, but not unkind. And this is, I have a separate group for game design stuff. I have a separate group for writing stuff. Once I have a draft or a prototype, I share it with them. And I notice how they interact with it. And I ask them for their feedback. And I am very open to feedback. I think feedback is critical, but learning how to implement feedback is also a valuable skill. Now, a lot of the time you get feedback from all over the place. And it is really important for you to judge what feedback is relevant to your vision, and what your vision can do without. This is where asking the hard questions, stating your intention, gets to be really important. If something feels like it can enhance one of your hard questions, for example, I want to make my player or my reader feel joy. If you get a piece of feedback that says, every time this happens, throw in fireworks. Now that is definitely something that can work on increasing joy. But if you get something that says, instead of the text reading congratulations, can you make it read well done? You could, but really, is it really important? Is it critical? That's where your hard questions make a lot of sense. Now, again, I'm saying, being open to feedback is something that comes with practice. The first few times you get feedback, it always smarts just a little. You start to question yourself, you go through a bit of self-doubt. That's okay. It's part of the process. The more you do it, the longer you keep at it, the easier you will find that receiving feedback is. And a lot of the time you'll discover that it actually makes what you're creating a whole lot better. Which brings me to my favorite part of any process, iteration. I love editing things. When I'm writing, my favorite part of writing is the editing process, because this is where I have a structure for the most part, and I really just get to play with words. And I write because I love playing with words. Similarly, when I'm building games, this part is really when I start polishing the scaffolding that I've already put in place. And iteration is a non-stop process. It is a really, really fun process. But there is such a thing as taking it too far and being unable to let go on your quest for perfection. And what I have found over the last decade is that there is no such thing as absolutely perfect. It's an endless road. There is close to perfect, and there is a type of perfection that you are happy with. And when you get there, at least I find when I get to that point, I'm happy to let go of my work. An interesting example, when I was writing my book, I edited it a whole lot. And at one point, I realized that I was editing it for the sake of editing. Every single time I'd read through the book, I'd decide that, cerulean was a better word for blue in this sentence, right? And a lot of the time, those kinds of changes start to become very meaningless. And that's when I decided, I'm actually not adding value to this. I'm just playing with it out of my fear of letting it go. And so I eventually ended up letting it go. So I really believe that identifying the place where you let go of your work is something that is really important. It is, again, unique to every single creator. There's a famous American poet named Walt Whitman, one of my favorite poets. And he wrote one volume of poetry called Leaves of Grass his entire life. And all he did was edit it. It is one of my favorite volumes of poetry of all time. But he made the decision to write just this one collection of poems in an entire lifetime. And I respect that decision. But to me, I want to write multiple books. So I always find that point where I'm comfortable with what my work looks like. And then I send it out and I show my work again. Going back to what I said a little while ago about having trusted people who can read your work, who can support you while you're creating it, it's really important to build a community of creators. Something that I've always found very problematic about our education system, certainly when I was in school, is that so much of it is built on a sense of competition. You are encouraged to outdo people, to build rivalries, to get first rank, to be the best. From everything I've experienced in both the world of games and the world of writing, there's nothing more fulfilling than collaboration. Being able to appreciate and support and cheer for other designers and writers when they are successful. Letting them know when they write something or create something that makes you really happy is a wonderful thing that you can do for people. And it is a wonderful thing that people will also do for you. And I've found that having a supportive writing community has been really helpful for me. Not just from the point of view that, people say nice things about my work. It's reassuring to know that you're not alone when you're confronting the many uncertainties that a creative career can bring. Another really important thing is to ignore external outcomes. This, again, is hard for me to do. And it was much harder for me to do in the past. Because, first, like I said, we imbibe these success stories that feel like they went from 0 to 100 overnight. And that's what is perpetuated to us through all forms of, popular culture and everything that we consume. But additionally, I worked in gaming, and gaming is a very different space from writing in the fact that external outcomes matter a lot. You work for a company, you have goals, you have targets that you have to hit. And you're always tracking your data. You always have access to it, and you're making all of these incremental changes to make sure what you've put out there performs better every single time or day over day. With publishing, none of that exists. And I'm really glad that I've got to experience this the hard way, because I've grown as a person to realize that I'm not doing any of this for the external validation. Yes, it is nice when it comes my way, but I'm really doing this because I find intrinsic fulfillment in being able to spin an entire world out of words. And the sooner one can make peace with the fact that you can't control what you cannot control, the easier it becomes to wake up every morning and go out there and create. And finally, trust the process. Things will not happen overnight. Sometimes you might not succeed the first time around. Things might go horribly wrong or slightly wrong. What you put out there will not be perfect. Give yourself time and just show up every single day and keep going. Because that's the only way, you will eventually get to what your goal is. And of course, your goals can change. And in fact, you can often question your goals and decide not to pursue them. But as long as you are pursuing them, just give yourself time and space. Be kind and trust yourself and trust what you're doing, and that eventually nothing is a wasted effort. So, just a quick summary of the way I work with my creative process. This is really the backbone of everything that I do every single morning. And I've been doing this, in various capacities over 10 years. And all I can say is that over the span of 10 years, this just gets easier to do. It's never completely easy, but it gets better. You become more adaptable. You can do these things quicker. So if any of you is planning to embark upon a creative journey or is already midway through, I hope some of this is insightful and that some of this can help give you just a little bit of a boost so that you can carry on. That's it from me. Thank you so much for listening. You've been most kind. I'm now going to switch over to take questions.
Okay, guys, put your questions in the chat box and Lavanya will go through them and answer them. Lavanya, I just want to tell you that this could not have come at a better time because they've just, they're working on their last exercise of the semester and they've gone through the entire sort of, process of writing, process of working. They have, they've learned how to make mind maps, how to write concept notes, how to draft, how to incorporate feedback, how to collaborate and, make presentations and how to polish their drafts and stuff like that. So really, I didn't know that this is what your talk would include, but I'm so happy that this has happened. It's, because it just sort of, it's great coming from someone like you, for them to sort of, sort of hear you say that, I think is like so important, because you are in the writing field, in the publishing field. So this is amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so
yeah.
much.
Okay, so we have questions coming up now.
Oh, great. Okay, questions. Just keep typing them. I'm going to go one at a time in the order in which they're appearing. So Isha asks, what do you do when you feel your ideas are getting repeated in some or the other way? Now, there are two ways I encounter repeated ideas. One is in my own work, and the other is, in the work of other people. And both of them are kind of tricky for me to navigate. I'll start with the one that's most in my control, which is my own ideas. I have found that a lot of the time when I work nonstop, I tend to get into a bit of a rut where the ideas eventually end up being feeling like an echo. And at this point, I actually just step away completely from what I'm working on. Now, I create from the point of view where I don't want to repeat myself. I want everything that I write or everything that I create to offer a fresh new perspective. So what I do is I step completely away from it. I take a break, maybe shut down everything I'm doing, for a week, engage with a lot of content out there that is vastly different from what I'm working on. And then I return to it and see if I can do that, if I can execute an idea completely uniquely or do it differently. This is harder to do when you're working on a deadline and when you're working on a tight deadline. And sometimes I realize that when I'm working on a tight deadline, if my ideas are being repeated, it's okay. Because absolute creativity and time are kind of counterintuitive to each other. If you really want to create something that's never been seen before, you need to have time on your side. But if all you've got is a few days to deliver something and you end up repeating an idea, I've come to make peace with that. But keep in mind, I've been doing this for 10 years. So, after 10 years, you kind of make peace with some of these things. It can feel intimidating though. And I generally dislike my work when I find that it is repetitive. I hope that answers your question. Okay, next question. Jeemith asks, one, the game Oasis in the movie is an advanced version of our world's metaverse. Is that somewhat similar to the fate of our world in the coming future? I haven't seen this, so I'm afraid I don't have an informed answer about this. But you know what? I'm going to go and watch it, and yeah, maybe I will tweet about this, and I will say what I feel about it. Yeah. Humera asks, as you said, you were the part of the minority because you're female. How did you overcome those challenges? Great question, really relevant question. It is an inevitable challenge for any woman, any kind of minority working in a creative field. I think what I did was just dig down. I stuck to my guns, I stuck to my principles, and I came up with a framework of priorities. Now, I'm a big fan of frameworks because they just give me something that helps me feel like I'm more in control of situations that are not in my control. So I decided, my quality of life is going to involve 2 or 3 things, right? This means if big important decisions are being made by all the men when they all go and hang out at parties that women don't end up getting invited to, so be it.
And if that keeps going, and if it continues indefinitely, then this job is not for me. Now, luckily, I didn't encounter too much of that at some of my gaming workplaces. I will say that, the men were somewhat inclusive, but I did find that in many occasions, I had to yell twice as loud to be heard in a room, right? And I had to be twice as prepared to defend any perspective, because your immediate boss might be a nice guy. Your immediate team might be nice people, but you just never know when you are going to encounter somebody who comes in with a gendered bias, and how that gendered bias is going to impact the room's receptivity to your point of view. So the unfortunate truth is I did and have often had to do, 2x the amount of homework, have backup arguments to my backup arguments if there's something I really believe in, and also pick my battles. And I think picking your battles is something that is great advice, regardless of whether, you know, uh, you're male or female, regardless of whether you're a minority or you belong to majority. When you're in a workplace, not everything is worth winning. So I realized I'm going to prioritize what I want to win on, push myself really hard to win at that. And the rest, I'm okay letting it go. Over time, I also adopted a principle, which is argue once, argue twice, argue thrice, and then just let it go. Because if people aren't open to your idea, there is no point breaking your head. And again, this would let me determine, is this workplace somewhere I can see myself being? I hope that answers your question. From all the experiences that you've gathered, could you please suggest some tip to be creative enough to your satisfaction in a high pressure environment? This is from Sadhvi. So I think what I have learned to do over the years is I've learned to identify what kinds of creative cues I'm most responsive to. Let me break that down. So I'm inspired by a number of things around me, everyday life, music, other people's books, movies. All of these things come together to inspire me. And I generally have an enormous repository of all these go-to, let's say, okay, I will go and talk about music because it really works for me. I have this list of go-to pieces of music that I will go to when I need to listen to something that evokes a particular mood. So for example, if I'm writing an action sequence and the words just don't come, I listen to something really fast-paced. And that kind of prompts a certain change of mood within me, which sometimes works. If I'm writing something really sad, I listen to, say, classical music with violins. And similarly, if you've got that one go-to that really works, a lot of writers end up just going for a walk and they dictate voice notes to themselves. And I've tried this myself and it really works. Sometimes it helps to, take a break and go do something else completely. Hanging out in the garden and tending to my plants sometimes inspires me. So as the more you engage with these things and you experiment in a very trial and error fashion, the sort of faster you will find these pathways to instant inspiration. And for me, the pathway to instant inspiration almost inevitably ends up being music. And once I'm in that zone and I create, when I start refining, I might go and read a book. Just to, fall in love with words again. I hope that answers your question. Aditya asks, can you elaborate on the topic of external outcomes and minimize its effects? Yes. So external outcomes effectively are the metrics of success that we believe are metrics of success, not because we've arrived at them intrinsically, but because we've kind of been trained to view these things as success. Now, there's a huge list of these. I'm going to list a few common ones, right? In a creative career, for example, you write a book that sells 1 million copies. Your book gets adapted into a movie, right? You have an adaptation deal. With a game, you wind up designing $1 billion game, and you never have to work again another day in your life. These are very popular notions of success. inevitably they are tied into some kind of monetary outcome. They are tied into some sort of public perception in terms of fame. And these are, they are nice to have if they come your way. And you can certainly create in order to maximize your chances of hitting these. So for example, in India, when you're a writer in India, there are some genres that are more widely read than others. I choose to write science fiction and fantasy, not the most widely read genre. And it's a conscious choice because I enjoy creating in this space. But if I wanted to write towards, let's say, a huge readership, maybe I would pick another genre. Maybe I would write nonfiction or romance. Um, but to me, when I say minimizing the importance and the effects of external outcomes, I think this is a hard thing to internalize until you experience it. Because what it really translates into is realizing that the external outcomes are things that you cannot control. Nothing that I do, unless, let's say, I pour, lakhs of rupees into it, I'm not going to get an insanely high profile publicity campaign for my work as a writer. But if I put my heart and soul into what I write, and I have a lot of fun waking up every day and writing stuff that I really believe in, I'm going to feel good about myself and I'm going to feel good about my work and I will believe in my work. And that's what I mean about sort of deprioritizing external outcomes, minimizing the effects. It's hard. I won't lie about that. The first time you realize that maybe your game is not going to make $1 billion, or that VCs don't want to fund this project you're working on, or that your book is not going to be read by millions of people. It's a bit of a sucker punch, but then you really start appreciating the deeper things about the whole process of creating it. And that's what's most valuable to me. I know this is tricky and possibly quite high level, but I hope that helps. Jeemat was asking about Ready Player One. Okay, all right. So Ready Player One is a really fun movie. I definitely think that, this is one of our possible futures. When it comes to writing science fiction, we're not really predictive. We're more kind of playing with thought experiments. We say, what if the future looked like this? And then we go out and build what that future looks like and how humanity behaves in that future. So is it a possibility? Absolutely. I think, there's no limit on the possibilities. It's really up to all of us to decide and to work together to try and determine what that future is going to be like. Samyukta says, do you feel overwhelmed by the competition in the writing field sometimes? If yes, how do you overcome this? Great question, because like I said, we are raised in competitive spirit with the way our education system is designed and everything else around it. But I don't really feel competitive. I don't feel pressure from competition. It's actually exciting when you see people who are writing in the same space you are and being really successful, because it means an opportunity exists for you. So if another writer, let's say, writes a very similar futuristic book and that book does really well, that's good news for me, because that means there are people who are interested in their book, therefore they will be interested in my book, and we can all win together, as opposed to, trying to cancel each other and be a bit stabby about it. So I don't really subscribe to competition as a philosophy in writing. And this is in every arena, regardless of whether it's in India, whether it's internationally with more and more South Asian writers emerging and publishing overseas. I think it's all good news. And the more people there are, the more readers there are. So that's how I deal with competition. Vidush asks, how would you rate your experience with the literature degree? A good friend of mine loves literature and wants to work in the field, but is anxious about career opportunities. What advice would you give her? Good question. So I loved studying literature. I enjoyed my degree. It opened my eyes to so many new horizons of what kind of work was out there. I encountered writers I'd never read before or never even heard of before. Um, and I really figured out how to study a text and analyze a text in not just in terms of the words within a book, but within the wider framework in which it was created, the cultural context of it. And there are actually multiple theories on how to engage with books and all of that, but it was very exciting because it opened my eyes to this huge spectrum of ways in which I could engage with reading. I understand the anxiety about career opportunities because especially in India, a career in the arts is a very difficult one to handle. Something that I do have to point out, which slipped my mind when I was making my talk, is that I've been very lucky to have parents who've been very supportive of whether I wanted to do arts or work in gaming or quit my job and be a writer. They've always been very supportive. I worked in gaming, which is a fairly lucrative industry. So I had a lot of savings from that. And I have a long-term partner who is very supportive of my writing career. Now, all of this enables me to sit right now and write full time. And it is a privilege. And it is not a privilege that everybody necessarily has. It's a privilege that it would be lovely if everyone could work towards building in terms of, working a regular job, building up a lot of savings, and then embarking upon a creative career. Now, having said all of this, I think there are more opportunities available now in the arts, in academics, in gaming, and a whole bunch of different avenues, really, to be a creator, to be a writer. So if her passion is literature, I would absolutely say go for it instead of, force fitting oneself into, let's say, doing engineering when your heart's really not in it. But also, be very cognizant that instant success and overnight success in any creative career, even if it's academics or filmmaking or being a musician, is not the norm. And it will take years of hard work after that to work towards it. I hope that's helpful advice. Samiksha asks, collaboration is fun, but how do you deal with conflicting or contradicting ideas? They tend to make you question your approach. When someone comes in with a completely opposite idea that makes sense, what do you do? Indulge in those opinions or let them go? Great question. So I've often found that conflicting or contradicting ideas can be really helpful for the overall betterment of the product or the feature that I'm working on, especially in a team environment. Something that has always been my filter for these is that anyone working in a team environment is all working towards a single goal. Everybody wants what's best for the product that they're building. And so when someone comes up with a completely different idea to my own, and comes to me with it, initially I'm always slightly attached to my own idea, but let's say it makes 100% sense. At that point, I'm happy to let go of my own idea. My idea doesn't count anymore if everything that the other person is saying, if it adds up, and if it feels like it will make a big difference to the product that we're working on, I'm happy to go with that idea. Having said that, if it's like splitting straws and both ideas are equally good, a lot of the time it's very helpful to have a long chat about both ideas and to really put down pros and cons of idea A versus idea B and how they kind of roll up into, your big statement about what you intend to do with this and what your vision for this product is. And if you still cannot come to a conclusion after talking it out between, two people, it helps to have a mediator. Now, what I've experienced working on team projects is wherever there are multiple people assigned to work on a specific project, we've tended to always distance one or two of them and tell them that they work as, approvers or mediators. Not because they have positions of power, but because they are sitting there as fairly neutral third-party observers. Why this is helpful is when you're actually working on a project, you are really up close to the project. And you never get the distance to look at the project from, a bigger picture perspective. When you've got one or two people who are kind of sitting it out, and when they can look at the project from that outsider perspective, you might actually find a solution that works for everybody. So that's how I would deal with that. Savya asks, how do you deal with rejection over something you spent a lot of time creating? That's a great question. Rejection always hurts. It hurts less the more you get rejected. But whenever I get a rejection, I take the time to feel sorry for myself. But I time box it. So I tell myself a day, right? Or 2 days. It's okay. You worked really hard on it. Take the time, accept that this is not working for this person. Feel sorry for yourself. But I also remind myself that creativity and any outcome of creativity, whether it's design, whether it's writing, is really subjective. It might not appeal to person X, right? But it certainly could appeal to person A. Two people can read or engage with the exact same piece of work, and one person will love parts of it, and another person will hate the exact same parts of it. So while the feeling that somebody doesn't want your work hurts in that moment, I always remind myself that it's okay that this person doesn't want it, somebody else might. And so after I let myself feel sad about it for a little while, in a limited period of time, I send it back out. And I'm open to seeing where it goes. Anandi asks, according to you, how does a corporate setup with its deadlines and work pressure restrictions for a creative professional as compared to freelancing? Oh, this is a great one. Very interesting too. So I feel like, I think probably the biggest difference between a corporate setup and freelancing is to some degree autonomy. Because when you are a freelancer, a lot of the time you get to pick and choose the projects that you work on. And you have the freedom to choose projects that you are very passionate about. But when you are in a corporate setup, each company has its own vision and its own goals. And everything you're creating has to align towards this. Because that's what they hired you to do. So that in that regard, if autonomy is something that you are very passionate about, if you want to retain complete control over the kinds of work that you're doing, freelancing works really well. But when you want to, I would say, learn really, really quickly and learn a lot in a very limited period of time. When you are working in a corporate setup and you've got all of these teammates, some of whom have way more experience, you are kind of in a pressure cooker of ideas and processes, and you will really pick them up very quickly. And that's what I did, and it worked really well for me. I know people who've done the exact opposite, and it's worked really well for them as well. So it really depends on what works best for your personality, I would say. I enjoyed working in a team environment where every single person taught me something and enriched my perspective on what it meant to create. And now, having had that experience, I'm very comfortable, working on my own projects and picking and choosing the projects I get to work on. Daria asks, when you wrote your novel, how did you decide what it was going to be about? And did you target a specific audience, both when writing the novel and designing a game? Okay, so when I wrote my novel, I did not have a specific target audience in mind. I tend to kind of not think too much about who my audience will be in terms of curating what I write for them. I like to write to express my vision to the wider world. And, like I think I was saying before, it is perfectly okay to write the other way around as well. To say, I only want this novel to appeal to people who are 25 to 30 from urban backgrounds, living in all the metro cities in India. And it's perfectly okay to start at that point and to write a novel tailor-made to that. But when I write, I tend to think, I want to write a novel that puts my ideas out into the world. And so that's how I approached it. As for the ideas in my novel, I think a lot of them came from simply observing how the tech bubble that is startup-driven Bangalore works. My novel is about the future of Bangalore, where it's renamed Apex City and run by a corporation. And it talks about a city where everyone is stack ranked based on their contributions to society, depending on how productive they are, how their social personas are perceived by other people in the city, and so on. And the idea for that came from just my experiences of what Bangalore feels like these days, where, there's almost like a hive mind of shared experiences, and it exists in this little bubble. We're all kind of watching. When I say we are all, I'm specifically referring to people who work in the tech startup space. So everybody's watching the same kinds of content. Everybody is reading the same kinds of content. It's there's a sort of uniformity to the experience, and it completely exists in a tiny little bubble where the wider world really doesn't matter because of how high pressure jobs are in the tech space. So that was really the basis for my novel. My novel started off with one specific chapter in it about a woman who goes into a grocery store and who's thoroughly disoriented because she hasn't stepped out into the real world in a long time. She's so used to sitting at home and ordering in all her groceries and all her food and her laundry and everything else. And that was based on a real life experience, because when I was working in games, I didn't have the time to go out to the grocery store and buy my own veggies. And so when I quit and went to the grocery store for the first time, it was terrifying. And I kind of took that and went from there. Dia, how do you break free from creative frustration that accompanies deadlines and working in a corporate environment? Great question. So hard to do, honestly. But there are a few things that really work for me. So I take weekends horribly seriously. I mean, there have been times when, even as the new kid at work with less than 6 months of experience, people have come up to me and said, oh, team's working on a weekend, will you come in? And I said, do I have a deliverable that I have to give? I've already submitted all my work for the week. No, but come for moral support. And I said, weekend, nope, not happening, right? Now, that seems like a mean thing to do. And it's arguable, people sit on either side of the fence. But to me, sort of dialing it back, going all the way to zero, and then recharging from zero is really important. And so I've burnt out a bunch of times. I have burnt out, I would say, at least 2.5 times. And this is because of failing to do things like this. So I did that the once, but then, to parallel that, there have been times when I'm working on my own features and I've worked, 2 months straight, no weekends, because I wanted to see that feature through to the best of my ability. And the burnout after that was tremendous and not a fun feeling at all. So over the years, I've kind of come to a point where I realized that downtime is incredibly important. I will switch off. To the point where, because I'm creating all the time and because I'm writing, it's very hard for me to even do something as basic as binge watch a TV show without deconstructing how it works in my head. So a lot of the time when I'm watching TV, I'm looking at, oh, interesting use of suspense over here. Nice character arc, wonderfully executed, big reveal, right? Like that's how I watch, everything from, I don't know, everything from Game of Thrones to, I don't know, name a show. That's how I watch all of it. And so I realized this is not working for me. So when I want to switch off and dial it back to zero, I watch MasterChef. I watch The Great British Bake Off. I watch reality TV because there's nothing for me to really deconstruct over there. And so what I would suggest then is finding activities to do that are completely unrelated to your daily work. Another thing that I find really helpful is, just going for walks or doing yoga, or I don't know. I recently had very bad carpal tunnel syndrome, and so I had to do a lot of physiotherapy to recover from it. And so now I like lifting weights, and my brain just switches off, while I'm doing this, and that really helps me take a complete break from all of the pressure surrounding my job. I hope that's helpful. So Has, would like you to tell us more about your first novel and what kept you determined to finish it in spite of gaps in between where you had to go back to game development. Because once a creative work is left halfway, most of us just leave it there. Yeah, that's true. So, this is interesting because I have also done that a lot. My first novel was not the first thing I wrote, right after college and all of that. I was writing something else, and I did leave that, halfway there. In fact, I went back to it one NaNoWriMo and just sat and wrote all of it because it was a 1-month thing. I could see the end in sight. But with my first novel, so this was an idea. I do have to clarify, actually, wait. I took a bunch of breaks in the middle, and I was not working on this novel that was eventually finished. So I had a bunch of unfinished projects. I finished some. I finished a draft that's never seen the light of day. Like, I'm never going to publish it, but I finished it, right? And that was a big win for me because that was the first time I finished a book beginning to end. That was during one of my breaks. I was just getting back to work, I think, when I finished that. I have tons of projects that I've begun and never finished. But this novel that I was writing, I was consulting while I was writing it. So I didn't have a full-time job. And I very intentionally did not have a full-time job because I felt at that point, I didn't have the discipline to be able to balance both. And I had experienced time and again that the minute game development became very intense or stressful, I would just drop the novel. I'd just say tomorrow's problem, right? Having said that, when I had my first novel draft ready and it went off for editing, I was back at a full-time job. And so I was balancing both while I worked my full-time job. And I think over time, with enough practice, I just got used to being able to prioritize one over the other, depending on the need of the hour. So there would be times when I would need to turn in edits on my first novel. I would need to turn them in, let's say, by the end of next week. And I would just call my company and say, I'm going on leave without pay, I'm sorry, right? And I would take that hit because at that point, it was my priority to deliver the novel. And similarly, when there wasn't so much pressure on the novel, I would just show up at work day in and day out and deliver. And it was a balancing act. Again, going back to the burnout, very important when you're doing multiple jobs, all of which are creative, to really be able to find activities that let you hit zero. Other things that I do, I sketch. I'm not a great artist. In fact, I'm not an artist at all, but I just doodle, right? And I sketch. That helps me de-stress. So all of these tiny little things that can help us switch off are invaluable. Savyasachi asks, how do you think one should navigate the toxic environments that game studios sometimes can be, with their high layoff rates, lack of diversity, and often uncompensated overtime work? Yeah, this is very tricky, um, because game studios around the world have a reputation for being toxic environments. I think there are some game studios that are changing, um, at least in their approach to toxic environments. I know of some studios that are um, trying to fix, just the sheer disparity between the male and female employees. Um, and, you know, I think the best way one can handle this is to have a clear set of priorities about why you're going into work. And to have, hopefully, a support system within that game studio where you can escalate things to if they seem, really off to you. Now, I've generally had the good fortune of having good support systems. A lot of places don't. I mean, I'm sure everyone who's into games or into this knows about some of the massive scandals that have emerged in the wake of Me Too about game studios around the world. And in situations like that, I think the only way to deal with those is to all out protest against them. There are a lot of situations that are a lot less stark, where, like you said, there's a lack of diversity. Push for more diversity. I think a lot of newer HR managers want diversity. And if you bring this up as a problem, they are open to listening. The most important thing you can do is to keep communicating what's working for you and what's not working for you. But you have to keep in mind that you're taking a chance every time you do this, because the ugly truth of any work environment is that there might be work environments where people are not open to this at all. And at that point, you will often need to be able to walk away from your job and find a new one if you disagree with the way things are being done in a particular studio. And I personally encourage doing that if things are very difficult to handle and if things look like they aren't going to change anytime soon. When it comes to uncompensated overtime work, oh boy. I think it's just symptomatic of gaming. I'm yet to come across a game studio that actually pays overtime to anyone who's a full-time employee. Yeah, I think if you're on contract, a lot of studios pay you overtime, but if you are full-time, it's just expected. Having said that, again, there are game studios waking up to this and trying to prioritize work-life balance. And I think, as the world talks about this a lot more, we are moving into a newer era of how these studios are run and managed. And I believe that change is for the positive. I'm not sure how fast it's happening though. Isha asks, what was something that made you choose the game design field twice after quitting it? I love games. I mean, that's the simple answer. Working on games, building them, it's like a dream of a career for me. If I didn't want to write books more than make games, I would be making games still. And there's a bunch of reasons. If I had to break down what it gives me from a creative point of view, it's the ability to tell a story across multiple media. I'm using visuals, I'm using animation, I'm using sound, I'm using behavior to get somebody to be immersed in a game, is to give them an experience, is to give them a series of tasks that they need to do in order to succeed at it, in order to want to return to it. All of that is stuff that I love doing. I love thinking about it, reading about it, building those experiences. I am a gamer. So when I'm not writing and reading, I actually play more games than I watch shows. So yeah, that's what made me keep going back. I might still go back at some point just for fun because I enjoy it so much. But yeah, that's why game design always is a second career for me. And I think that's the end of the questions that we have. Thank you all so much. Such fun questions.
Thank you so much, Lavanya. We've gone way over the time limit and you've been so patient and kind in answering all the questions. So thank you so much for doing that. Thank you to the Dean, the program chairs and the CFP team, and thank you to Vika for figuring out all the logistics. CFP, thank you so much for being such a great audience. See you next semester. Have a lovely weekend, everyone. See you.
Thank you.